Mr. Anshul Prakash, Partner, Khetan and Co. Dr. Swati Zindal Garg, Advocate on Record, Supreme Court of India. Ms. Apeksha Mattu, Partner, Trilegal.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's virtual session on key expectations for the HR sector in the upcoming Union Budget 2024. I welcome all the partners, the eminent speakers with us, Mr. Anshul Prakash, Dr. Swati Jindal Garg, and Ms. Apeksha Mattu. Thank you so much for agreeing to have this session with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, to start with this virtual session on the key expectations, I would like to ask Mr. Anshul Prakash, what, according to you, are the key expectations of the HR sector from the Union Budget 2024?
So, thanks, Sandhya. I think the most critical expectation for the HR sector, and I think the economy in general, when it comes to the upcoming Union Budget, are the possible measures that the government may announce for creation of jobs, and most importantly, to address the rising unemployment issue. Now, various surveys and reports across the country by think tanks, by establishments who are in this domain, have noted that the unemployment rate in India is, as of June 2024, is as high as 9.2%. And it is very crucial for the government to address this particular issue. And in my view, the major factor which compounds India's employment issues and the reason for high unemployment amongst India's youth is the very continuing skill mismatch between the abilities and skills that are required by the labor market, industry in general, and those that are actually imparted within the Indian education system. Now, government can establish a strong basis for equitable growth and sustainable development by probably charting a very clear path for strategic investments in skill development. And that must be and should be a top priority, which would probably encourage tighter collaboration between the academia in the country and the industry. And of course, that would tend to promote an atmosphere that is also conducive to entrepreneurship. And for example, I'll quickly also talk about in a couple of budgets in the past also, emphasis has to be there on probably improving the infrastructure in the government industrial training institutes. Now, that's something which is equally important. And from there, you can bring up the element of addressing unemployment as an issue.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And especially this rate of unemployment has increased after 2020. A lot of business have been shut down, a lot of restructuring happened. And yes, totally agree with you on that. Thank you so much, Anshul. Now my next question is to Ms. Apeksha. What, according to you, is the most pertinent issue in labor laws that needs to be addressed immediately by the government in this budget?
I think one of the most important things that we need to address when it comes to labor laws is that the labor laws I think they need a facelift, if I was to say it, in a very positive sense. See, we all have to appreciate the fact that most of our labor laws are either pre-independence or formulated post-independence or in the early 60s and 70s.
Right.
We have moved very, very far away from that. The kind of progression that we have seen when it comes to businesses, comes to technology, comes to even the way that India has progressed and expanded. And I'm not even going to talk about the last decade. Let's just talk pre and post-COVID.
Right.
We have the development that we have seen in AI. We need our labor laws to be able to address all of this. I think the other thing that we are not looking at, which our labor laws need to do, and there has to be a methodology, is the informal labor force in our country. If I go by the last survey that I was reading is about there is the informal unaccounted for, as we call it, the labor force, which is not accounted for anywhere, which what we call as casual labor is about 85% of the country's workforce. So, they are not regulated, they are working, and that is there because even for the businesses, see, this is not something that the government can do alone. One needs to appreciate the fact that the government is not God. The government is a machinery that can only work when there is cooperation between businesses and the government. A country cannot be run by one man or just a machinery till its citizens don't cooperate with it. So I think regularizing the informal workforce structure would be one point. And secondly, recalibrating our labor laws in line with and at the speed at which India is looking at progression and development is something that really needs to be addressed. We have laws that are not matching with what we are trying to do to run our businesses today. They're a little old-fashioned. We need to spruce up.
Yes. For example, the Factories Act, it's 1948. It was
The
made in
Industrial
1948.
Disputes Act is 1947. We have the Payment of Payment of Wages Act, which is 1936. So, like we are looking at, let me give you a small example. In the Payment of Wages Act, now I'm not getting into the details of applicability, but overall it says that you're required to pay the full and final settlement of an employee within 2 days of the employee's departure. Let's
Which is
be
not
very
possible.
honest. It's not possible. Let's look at an organization like an Accenture. They have 15,000 employees. The speed at which they have attrition, how can you expect that they are going to be able to calculate everything within 2 days and give it to the employee? The practicality of it is not there. Even if you don't want to, you end up flouting the law. I get this question from my clients all the time, and the industry practice, to be very honest, is everyone just tells everyone that, look, you're going to get it by your next pay cycle. And that's how they do it. If an employee leaves in a particular month, the next pay cycle, by the next pay cycle, everything is cleared. Because by that time, the accounts team, the HR team, they have a system in which they can make sure that they check all the records, they know what they need to take into consideration, and then pay the person. And this is not because they want to shortchange the worker. They need to make sure that the employee, all the records are above board. It's a job that needs to be done carefully to do justice to the company's business as well as to the individual who's leaving the organization. So, our laws on certain respects are very, very theoretical. They are not looking at the practicalities of business. So that is something we really need to address.
Right. Even if we get AI-based softwares, HR softwares, even then, this 2 days timeline is very difficult to meet because on the practical aspect, it is difficult.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, Sandhya. One needs to remember that, and this is a debate for another day, that AI one day will take over or will it not take over, and how much of the human intelligence will not be required because there'll be AI. As of now, we need to understand that even if you have a software, there is information that needs to be fed into the software. You need to check the records. Like I said, in order to do justice to the company's business as well as the employee who is going out, if a payment is missed, if a recovery is missed, either the company will be at a loss or the individual will be at a loss. So they need to give the opportunity so that a sanitation check can be carried out. And one also needs to understand really what is the logic behind the fact that you need to pay it out in 2 days. Really, what were the considerations then, and why, and what was the applicability and coverage of Payment of Wages Act when this act came out, where you wanted it to be paid in 2 days because people were working very hand to mouth.
Yes.
But you don't expect an engineer, a software engineer from Accenture to be working hand to mouth. So where is the rush?
Correct.
Where is the hurry? The records can be checked. We can ensure that everything is kosher and then take it forward.
Right.
Yeah.
So the government has taken an initiative. They came out with 4 codes on labor laws, but they are still under the stage of
this. I agree with you, and we can talk about the codes with our next questions. But I think what is important is, whilst the government has attempted to address some of the niggling issues that are there and that have been there, that have been heavily litigated, like for example, contract workers working in core labor, core business activities and all that, some of the matters still remain a question mark. Some of such issues have not been addressed. And to that extent, we can say that, it's also because, when the codes came out, and I don't mean to criticize a particular government, but when the codes came out, and you want people like us, like Anshul and myself and all legal luminaries to comment, you have to understand that we as lawyers put in a lot of hard work into researching, reading, understanding the implications. So you can't give us a 120-page code and expect us to respond in 15 days. So I think when there were comments being called from experts, I think that period should have been there where we should have been given the opportunity to give our comments on things. When a legislation is coming out, you've taken months and years to draft a legislation. You can't expect us lawyers to respond on that in 15 days. It's not one question, it's a question of an entire legislation. And we, being devil's advocates, we try and argue. Any lawyer I would know, with two other esteemed lawyers on this panel, I would say we tend to argue both sides of the case at all given points in time, despite who we may be representing. So we try to cover all the bases, which is why it is very, very critical that while some points have been addressed in the courts, the others are a question mark, and I guess they will get addressed over time. I will appreciate the government for what it is trying to do. Let's not only sit and criticize. They have at least tried to make an attempt to consolidate the laws. But like I said, we have a long way to go, and we need to be more closer to reality and the practicalities of how businesses run in our country or even overseas, because we have so much of overseas investment into India, and then take into consideration how the laws should be addressing those points.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing your points on this. Now my question is to Dr. Swati. What are the key discrepancies between state and central labor laws that need immediate attention for harmonization?
Yes. Ms. Upeksha and Mr. Anshul, as they have very well pointed out the flaws in the system now. Over a period of time, India has stressed upon the fact that there should be an ease of doing business. See, when we talk about an Atmanirbhar Bharat, we also have to talk about a platform that gives that, leverage to enterprising people who would want to do things on their own. We want to give them that ease of business. Now, is that ease really there? Ms. Upeksha rightly talked about the fact that where's the hurry? Act in haste and repent at leisure. That's what we all say. And rightly so. Now, you're talking about the discrepancies between the state and central laws. Now, when we talk about laws, we know that, compliance is another issue and the will to comply is another. In order to ensure that the compliance is there, we need to make the compliances easy. We don't want to complicate them to such an extent that it becomes difficult for a person who even wants to comply, let alone those who had no intention to comply with. Right. So the first thing that, that differs between the central and the state labor laws is that, there needs to be a harmonization of the laws. If you look at the minimum wages, now the different states, they have different minimum wages rates. So this creates a lot of inconsistencies and difficulties, especially for the businesses that are operating in different states. Now there, the compliance issues would be manifold. If you look at the other aspects, for example, forget the minimum wages also. If you look at the overtime rates, if you look at the working hours that are prescribed, even these vary between, different states. So talk about the problems that a particular business that is, working in various other states that he will face. Now, if he's having a central office somewhere, that particular business is going to have a tough time deciding which overtime to take into consideration, which minimum wage to take into consideration. Then again, let's assume that they do somehow, it's a mammoth task, they somehow do undertake that. If you look at the disputes that arise now, if you look at the industrial disputes now, the procedures as well as the authorities for resolving these industrial disputes, you will notice that they also differ from states to states. So what we primarily, to begin with, need is a unified approach. We want one nation and one system. instead of having, a set of different states and a different minimum wage here, a different industrial authority over there, as far as compliance is concerned. Now, all these compliance requirements also, their reporting, their various standards between the states, as well as qua the government, the central government, that can burden the businesses. Now, this discourages people. They are like, "Arey chodo, kaun kare?" I will not get into, when you talk about congratulating a person for his entrepreneurial skills, he will be like, "Okay, you're not letting me be enterprising enough. Where do I get the time to be enterprising? Because my time is all spent in compliances." Now, you look at the registration and licensing requirements that are there. We say that there are some areas which are, famous for their ease. The government has demarcated these various states where they propound the fact that, okay, there will be ease of business. Why don't you set up your industry here? But if you look at the registration and licensing requirements, you will see that there are so many problems of compliances that a person gets discouraged right at the very first stage of getting that license. Now, then there are so many other requirements for the labor also, like Ms. Apeksha has rightly pointed out, that we have a huge informal labor sector. More than 90%, I would say, if you look at the statistics as per 2020, they crossed 92%. So where are these informal labors being accounted for? It has to be done between the center and the state. We have now the eShram portal, which I would say is a very commendable, step that has been taken by the government. But we still have a long way to go. Especially if you look into the fact that, most of this informal sector is always rotating itself. Ab chalo katai ka time aa gaya, let us move to this state. Ab chalo distribution ka time aa gaya, let's come to the metropolitans. So how do we account for that? So eShram is a very good step in the right direction, but are the things moving as fast as they can? Now here, speed is necessary, because if we do not have the data on these informal laborers, we will not be able to make social security measures that are required for them. We will not have a database. We do not know who we are working for. So primarily, I would say on the whole, as far as the, the licensing that we need between the center and the states, this I would say is the important step.
Yeah, very rightly said that if a corporate has 2 or 3 offices in different states, it becomes very difficult for that enterprise to comply with the labor laws. Firstly, the labor laws are like more than 40 central, and then there are state laws. And if a company has like 3 or 4 locations, then the number exceeds like 120 or more. So it becomes really difficult for the entrepreneur to comply with these compliances. One thing, the government has tried to do while incorporating a new company, they have given registration and licensing to the corporate at the time of incorporation, but that's for only 2 laws, PF and ESI. What about other laws? There are like another like 40-50 laws. So they come up with few things and then they just stop and then they just sit on that. So I think that's the thing, the government has to really take into account. Thank you so much for sharing your views on this. Now I would like to ask Anshul. Anshul, what measures can be implemented to enable social security access for informal workers? Now that we have been talking about informal workers, so just wanted to ask this question to you.
Thanks, Sandhya. I think the point which I'm trying to make here is emanating from the budget, and of course, looking at how to revamp the labor laws. The finance minister cannot do it. It's just that when it comes to expanding the ambit of social security in India, there are measures that could be taken. Of course, on the labor law front, you have the 4 labor codes that have been on the anvil for a long time now. And of course, the objective was to have the streamlining and modernization of the existing labor law regime. Now, one of the features which is unique to the Social Security Code, which is amongst the 4 labor codes, is the introduction of social security schemes for the gig and platform workers. Now, the code proposes to set up a national social security board, which shall recommend to the central government on framing suitable social security schemes for different sections of organized workers, as well as the unorganized workforce, which include the gig and platform workers. Now, The government has already considered and is moving in the direction of providing social security benefits to the unorganized sector in that sense. But we need to see in what sense this infrastructure is going to be strengthened. And I have been focusing and emphasizing on that front because you may have the laws, you may have the labor codes also implemented. But I think the fellow panelists will always agree that it's always about implementation and execution of what you have put on paper. And the moment we are talking about doing business in India and how easy it is to for any establishment to really carry out business activities and operations, the most important point is you don't have to interpret the law, you don't have to interpret the procedure. It's very simple, it's very easy to comprehend, and the processes are such that you don't have to maneuver your way through the authorities and have discussions with them. Now, Social Security Code, of course, is yet to be implemented in its entirety. Now, central government has already implemented social security schemes for different sections. Now, we should be mindful of the fact that it's not just the EPF Act, it's not just the Social Security Code and the provisions contained therein. There are multiple instances of schemes being floated for the informal sector. For instance, you have the insurance schemes that are floated for handloom weavers. You have the handicraft artisans, fishermen, which are covered by the Pradhan Mantri Shram Yogi Mandan implemented in 2019. Now, this is a voluntary contribution scheme for the organized workers such as home-based workers, street vendors, cobblers, rap pickers, domestic workers, even rickshaw pullers and landless laborers. So there are schemes like Atal Pension Yojana, Pradhan Mantri Jeevan Jyoti Bima Yojana, Pradhan Mantri Kisan Mandhan Yojana, and so on. See, you have the schemes, you have, I would say, schemes and these plans which are already underway. Some of them are already out in the open. It's all about disseminating that information amongst the people who are the direct beneficiaries. And I think when it comes to budget 2024, my focus will be on ensuring that you put in as much emphasis financially from infrastructure viewpoint to ensure that while you have these schemes, there are beneficiaries who are actually taking the benefit from these schemes. That's the focal point of what I would expect on the social security front from Honorable Finance Minister when she's going to present the budget. I think there are certain state governments that have already taken measures to provide benefits to unorganized workforce. The government of Rajasthan had passed a bill to extend social security coverage to gig workers. Government of Karnataka has also introduced the Karnataka State Gig Workers Insurance Scheme, which provides insurance benefits for on-duty as well as off-duty accidents coverage for food delivery agents of different e-commerce companies. Of course, all the unorganized gig workers who are engaged in the delivery profession and activities with e-commerce establishments are meant to be covered by it. They have sought comments, and I think Apeksha also covered this point. Comments have been sought, but at least we are looking at some of these measures being undertaken by the governments at the state level. But probably more impetus need to be provided by the government of India when it comes to creating those infrastructure, emphasizing on the fact that unemployment is on the rise. Unorganized workers are indeed there, and the numbers have been increasing year after year. So that should be the focal point when it comes to dealing with the workforce issues in it.
Yeah, right. Apeksha, how can the government address challenges such as the challenges of integrating existing informal worker data into the proposed social security schemes?
See, honestly, it's a very loaded question. You know, I don't think in this big, large country of over a billion people, I don't think I'm a very small person to tell the government what to do. But the fact of the matter is that we have a large informal workforce. And the reason why we have a large informal workforce is because they are not getting accounted anywhere. Now, if the government wants to do something about it, we have to give, and sorry, I think the way I should put it is we have to understand that the government cannot achieve this alone. The reason why we have a large informal workforce, we need to understand the reasons for it first. The reason for that is because businesses in India are allowing the workforce to operate that way. They are allowing, they are okay and are accepting of the fact that workers or workforce, and I'm not saying this only that this is happening at an industrial or manufacturing unit level, that workers are allowed to work without the regularization or proper paperwork. So, like I said, government is not God. They need cooperation from the industry to be able to tap who are the informal workforce and why are they there. See, let's understand that one of the reasons why informal workforce exists in our country and at such high rates is because you can get away with not paying them social security benefits, right? That is why today, as Anshul pointed out, we are looking at schemes where we are going to cover the gig workers and the platform workers, and there are different things being done for different kinds of workers working at different places, whether you're talking about cobblers, whether you're talking about street vendors, whether you're talking about somebody as who's been hired maybe just to sweep, you know,
For
and most
example,
important,
unpaid workers in family businesses.
correct, unpaid workers, domestic workers. Let's look at large, well-to-do, affluent families. Or rather, I can give you my example. Today, if I have a car and I have a driver, I have insisted that my driver have accident and medical insurance. And I am okay to bear the cost of my driver getting that insurance. How many of our organizations, our employers are willing to take on that cost? They are not. So government cannot do miracles. What needs to be done is, in order for the informal workforce to be integrated, first we need to understand why is there informal workforce? Because you want to keep them off the books. You want to pay them a limited amount of money, but you want your work done. And that's the easy fix. You know, like, sorry to say, but we as Indians have this thing ki chalta hai. Kar lo na, bas manage kar lo na. We tend to manage a lot of things. The idea is today to address the issue and have a system. Like, for example, now under EPF, every employee has what we call as a universal account number, UAN. There needs to be some sort of a system, and see, I'm not a person from administration or governance, and I will tender my apologies in advance if this will be practical or not. But looking at some things that other nations are doing, you know, and yes, of course, our population is a huge challenge when we are taking that step, is to have a particular ID number. Like, I know we have Aadhaar cards and for linkage, but have something that, or if it can be the Aadhaar card alone, that can be used for creating records. So wherever you are working, they need to give you everything on the basis of your Aadhaar card. If you do that, what happens is there is a record created even if the company doesn't want the record to be created. I know of so many places where workers are deliberately kept off the books because 5 din ka kaam hai. You know, they say it's 5 days of work. Why do I want them to go through the system? Why do I want them to do anything? Casual workers, what we call as seasonal workers. You yourself gave the example. They work during a particular season, but during the harvesting season, they want to go back.
Yes.
Employers don't want to take the trouble of putting them into the system. It's too much of work according to them. But the point is, we need to start somewhere. One of the reasons what happened during COVID, migrant workers, we today have an enactment for migrant workers, interstate migrant workers. But how many of these migrant workers are really recorded on the books of the contractors through whom they are getting hired? See, the government has put some systems in place. The government will put more systems in place. But as Anshul very rightly provided, even if the systems are in place, if we don't follow them, we can't turn around and blame the government. We are the ones, they are putting a system in place. If you want a system in place, you also need to follow the system.
Right.
And what our large reason for informal workforce is not the government, it's us who run the businesses. If today I have a manufacturing facility, I need to make sure that even if I'm using a worker for 5 days, is he on my books or not? Or am I paying him out of my petty cash book and behaving like he never existed? And making sure that that cash is adjusted towards stationery and hardware and packaging and being done with it. Because you don't want a record in the system that this particular person worked with for you for 5 days. So when we talk about integration, I don't want to get ahead of myself and tell the government what to do. They have a country to run and they are busy enough, and we have several issues. I think the informal workforce system, if it needs to be addressed, the regularization of the system, the first step needs to be taken by us, where we become agreeable to put them on our records, where we are mentally prepared to ensure that they get the benefits and they get the salary. When you pay them cash, you're not doing any tax deduction at source.
Right.
You're not paying that tax to the government, right? So the government, like I said, cannot do miracles. Every administrative machinery needs help from its citizens to be able to work certain things out. If we are looking for this integration to happen, we need our businesses, and small and big businessmen. Please understand, it's not only the responsibility of the large businessmen. India thrives on MSMEs. We have more small businessmen than we have large ones. You know, business houses, there are only so many. So it's very, very important that at every level today, if you have a kirane ki dukan and you have a grocery shop and you have 2 boys working in that grocery shop, or you have these small beauty parlors, everything is not labeled and branded, where there are 3 girls working. Really, what is the system that we are following? Are we transferring money into bank accounts? The Indian government has absolutely made arrangements for everyone to have a bank account. Now, that's not something. So is everyone opening a bank account? Because the moment you open a bank account, you have a record. Are you paying that, or are you still making cash payments? How are you recording it? What are you doing about it? So I will very quickly summarize to say that the government cannot do miracles. If we have to integrate the informal workers into the social security system of our country, it is very important that first we recognize that they are workforce and be willing to put them on our books. Otherwise, the government can make 100 systems, but if you have no names to enter, it's like saying the government will start an attendance register, but if you don't have names to put in the attendance register, then there is not going to be attendance that can be taken. Very simply put.
One reason could be that, these companies are not making records of these workers who are being hired on a season basis, maybe because the penalties are quite lower, in the labor laws as compared to Companies Act. In the Companies Act, or maybe some other industrial laws, the penalties are very high. But in the labor laws, penalties are not so high. Maybe that's the reason that companies don't want to comply.
I'll tell you one thing very honestly. Penalties is not the sole factor that drives this. It is also the administrative trouble that they have to take. As Dr. Swati very correctly pointed out, you need to make the life of the business runners comparatively easy. The number of compliances that they need to put in place, when you look at it very holistically, I've taken the side of the government. I will also take the side of us business runners, if who are there. I'm a professional, but talking about it is that the number of compliances that they need to undertake, we have to realize that in their mind, they are thinking, is it easier for me to go through that much of a brain damage for the compliance, or is it easier ki main 5,000 rupees, you leave 5,000 rupees, should I give 1 lakh as penalty? That will be easier. You know, the cost, sometimes it is not about the money always. We have to remember that for a lot of, and for all of us, when in a very interesting session that I attended, somebody asked me, what is the most precious thing for you today? And I think they were expecting me to say money. I said time.
Right.
The most precious thing is time. Because, and that is why when you see large business houses, when you see senior leaders Why do they have so many people? It's not a status symbol to have an assistant. It is a question of whatever you can delegate so that my time frees up. It's called administration. So that is why I'm saying key to administration is, as Dr. Swati pointed out, make the system simple enough so that the employer in his mind doesn't think, I can't go through so much brain damage for one worker. Better keep him off the books, pay him, baap ko khatam karo, he's gone in 10 days and I don't have to remember anything. That's the point. That's where the government needs to come in and have their responsibility to simplify things and our responsibility to report even that one worker saying that I'm hiring this person, I'm hiring them for 10 days, so that his name or her name is there somewhere in the records. Very critical. So
Right.
both of us, each of the sides have their duties cut out for them.
Thank you. Dr. Swati, what are the challenges in extending EPFO and ESIC to informal sector workers, and how can these challenges be addressed?
See, the biggest challenge, like we all are saying today, is that if you talk about, EPFO, ESIC, the most benefit out of these institutions would go to the informal sector, because they are the people who are really in need of these kind of social security measures. Now, in order to give somebody a benefit, you need to identify that person who's in need. Now, if these people are all faceless, who do you take these benefits to? Now, like I said, we have the e-Shram by the government going in the right direction. We have more than 200 million people who have registered on that portal. Now, but when we talk about 92.4% of India's workforce being in the informal sector, I think 200 million is just not even the tip of the iceberg. So we have a long, long way to go. The first thing that we need to do is we have to identify these people who are our targeted beneficiaries. Only then our social security measures would go in the right direction and they would not be taken away by middlemen. Now, what are the challenges in extending these EPFO and ESIC payments to the informal sector? The first and foremost is the lack of awareness. Now, you have a house somewhere. You tell everybody would come to this house and I would give you free food. Let no one die of hunger in my watch. That house is the government. Government is promising the citizens of India that nobody would die of hunger. We have the public distribution system where we are giving free food grains, this and that. A, people do not know where this house is. B, people do not know that free food is being distributed. Just an example. So when we talk about EPFO, which talks about pension, when you are not able to work, or when some calamity befalls you, when your major earner he dies. When we talk about ESIC, that also talks about maternity benefits, that also talks about free medical aid to a particular category of people. Do people really know? And if they do, are these the people who actually need these free benefits? So the first thing that we need to do is identify these beneficiaries. The second thing that we need to do is tell these beneficiaries that, okay, we have these provisions for you. Be aware. Know that this is your right. Come forward, make that small contribution, and this particular benefit is going to be with you for your life, backing you up in your times of actual need. The next problem that arises as far as the informal sector workers are concerned is their irregular employment. So on the one hand, we have this government that is really working very hard. I would say the hardest of all. Why? Because the only thing that is stopping us is ourselves, the sheer number of us as, the Indian workforce. Now, the government has demarcated a very, very small percentage of the income that would go into the contribution as your EPFO contribution or as your ESIC contribution. But something that is very small and nominal for us can be exorbitant for a person of modest means. Considering the fact that the informal workers, they have very irregular employment. And like Ms. Upeksha rightly pointed out, most of the times they are not even, their naam is not even chada hua, so to say, on the company books. Now we are unable to identify these people. Their employment is here today, gone tomorrow. They cannot really, in the wake of their irregular appointment periods, they can't even give that small contribution. So most of their service goes as non-contributory service, in the light of which their service is not even accounted for. So they will not be beneficiaries, so to say, despite having given some contributions here and there. Then, like, you know, the top of the list is the administrative barriers. The intention is there, the beneficiaries are present, we have identified everybody, but what the heck? अब इन सबको लाइन लगा के इतना देंगे, छोड़ो भाई, अपने से ना हो पाएगा, right? So the enrollment process for EPFO and ESIC is such that it is very complex, it's very intimidating. What are we talking about? So many windows, so many check boxes. People are like, छोड़ो यार, जब बीमार पड़ेंगे अपने आप देखी जाएगी. So that देखी जाएगी attitude ना, that is not something that we were born with. The system has made it such that we would rather go through our ailments than fill those check boxes that are required in order to get that benefit that comes from EPFO, ESIC. Then, of course, the biggest ailment of all, trust. We have such big trust issues. There is often a lack of trust in the formal institutions. That is why we say that we need a lot of awareness, that needs to be instilled in all the people who are the target beneficiaries of these sort of schemes. They would say, अरे भाई, 200 रुपए हमारी जेब में आ रहे हैं, इसमें से भी 10 रुपए उधर दे दें, पता नहीं कभी जरूरत पड़ेगी नहीं पड़ेगी, अब ये 10 रुपए आज बचा लो. They don't want to invest in a scheme that will take a small portion of their very meager salary. So for us, what is 8%? What is 3%? Nothing. But for them, it's a big thing, They are looking at a time scale where, ये 10% 8% करके इतनी सैलरी तो हमारी इसी में चली गई. अरे क्या हो रहा है, हम गरीब आदमी को कुछ नहीं होता, हमें चाहिए ही नहीं. So even though the government has its own limitations, you can't give everything for free. There has to be some contribution taken so that, the benefit also goes to the right person who intends to take it. But these are the, fallbacks that we need to look upon and check in the long run in order that these EPFO, ESIC, schemes and benefits, they actually go to the right beneficiaries, and the people who are the right beneficiaries are able to take the best advantage from them. All in, primarily, I would say that.
Thank you for sharing that. Anshul, what steps can be taken to simplify and consolidate existing labor laws to reduce compliance burdens for employers while ensuring worker protection?
So Sandhya, I would like to again insist on the point that I think the main heading of this session is Budget 2024. And again, budget cannot be the means or the appropriate medium to really talk about reforming and streamlining the ease of compliance when it comes to the procedural part or amending the laws, because that's not something where you can really propose that we are going to amend the laws to do something. This is about what financial impetus can be given to ensure that implementation of these provisions is brought to the forefront. And as we have been talking about the ultimate beneficiaries, the informal sector, the formal sector employees, everybody is going to take that benefit. Now, of course, the 4 labor codes have been there, expected to come into force, at any point in time when the government will deem fit. But the way it is going to be implemented is essentially dependent on a substantial amount of interministerial collaboration, because it's not just the Union Labour Ministry, it is also about the other ministries, including the Finance Ministry, their role that will come into play. And why I talk about it today is that I have seen the compendiums, the sessions that are being undertaken by the Government of India through the Union Labour Ministry to educate the facilitators, quote unquote, who are meant to be appointed to probably do away with the prosecution-oriented regime, which is currently existing under the labor law regime as we see it today. Now, that's something which is important because the infrastructure to educate and sensitize the people who are supposed to be enforcing these laws. And I think it works either ways, because the co-panelists also spoke about the responsibility from all the sides. But I think what is important is not just about what kind of registers we are supposed to maintain and whether people have been included as beneficiaries within the organization system. What is really important is the question which is raised in a particular manner. Now, today, the way the law would really function is to probably ask question in a manner where it is very likely that you're going to be put forth, being an organization or business operator in the dock, and he is likely to face prosecution. Now, that's something which has to be turned around. And the whole point about strengthening the infrastructure of training these people who are the enforcers or facilitators as and when these laws are going to be implemented is to ensure that when you actually talk and inspect the premises, you're not prosecuting, but you're facilitating rectification of some of those loopholes that have transpired over the years. Now, that is where the budget will come into play, because we can talk about schemes, but how these schemes have to be implemented and enforced, you need money to do that. You need money to run those classes. You need money to run those sessions across the country. It cannot be the case that you just call in select few to New Delhi and have those sessions for people to become facilitators. So I won't talk about what should be the forms. I won't talk about how many fields have to be there, because that's not budget. I think what I would really focus about is the impetus which this budget can bring in on strengthening the overall infrastructure, and that essentially would read together with how these Social Security Code, Industrial Relations Code, Occupational Safety and Health Code or Wages Code, of course, the existing labor law framework, which comprises of as many as 44 labor legislations at the central level, and then as many state laws and regulations. All of that taken together is essentially about having that infrastructure in place to provide emphasis on how to train and sensitize the enforcers of law. So that's something which needs to be the focal point for this budget. But everything needs to run in parallel and in tandem when it's about amending the laws and probably ensuring that it's not just about consolidating what you already have, but it's also about improving the system in terms of ensuring that people who are coming with that outlook of being the facilitator live up to that role. That's that for me.
Yes, absolutely. So next question I have for Apeksha. Apeksha, do we need to tweak labor laws to accommodate modern workplace dynamics such as flexible working arrangements, remote work, and the gig economy?
So, I think given that Anshul has highlighted this, and I'm also very cognizant of the fact that we're talking about this in context of budget. Now, when you're talking about labor laws, let's be very honest, the finance minister can't sit and tweak the labor laws. But when you ask me whether we need a revision of the labor laws, I think in response to my first question, we said that it needs a facelift. It needs more than just a facelift. I think it needs a plastic surgery maybe. And it needs that because, like I said, it is a question of development and progression that we have been making, and the speed at which we have been making it. The progress that we may have made in the last 10 years is very different from the leaps and jumps that we have taken pre-COVID and post-COVID when it comes to AI, 5G, and all of these. These are a lot of things were work in motion which have now just come into play. So, do we need a revision in the laws? Yes, we do. Do we need to account for the modern business methods, the new types of businesses coming in, the new kinds of workforce and work arrangements that we have? Yes. I think from a budgetary perspective, what is very important is to understand that there are these avenues, to understand that there will need to be some costing for when somebody works remotely. Like, for example, if somebody is working remotely today, if I work from home, who is responsible for my electricity bill? When I work at our office, it's the office's responsibility. But when I work from home, who's going to pay my electricity bill? Who's going to pay my broadband and internet bill? Right? Who's going to pay for the fact that I'm sitting at home the whole day? So that is the part where probably we could look at and see finance. Neither can finance work in isolation, nor can the business. Even to run a business or run any kind of organization, you need the business, you need the creative, and you need the finance to work in tandem with each other. Similarly, I think whilst I understand that the background of this talk is to understand from a budgetary perspective, finance will also have to work with the administrative machinery where the administrative machinery will have to address the revision in the laws, which we absolutely need. We not only are we going to talk about the fact that we need to address about gig workers and platform workers and other informal workers. There are enough people who are doing enough things that are creative, who don't like to be, tagged as employees, as we call them. They are creators. And everyone today has a fancy name for it. So I think what the budget needs to address, or what the finance ministry of our country needs to be aware of, is administratively there are certain challenges, there are certain changes that are required, and how we can financially support those changes. For example, if there is a remote working structure, what kind of benefits can the government, in hand with the employers, extend to the workforce that works remotely, that doesn't need to come in. Today, a large part of the workforce, and I'm just talking based on whatever individual interaction I have had with a lot of people who are working in very, very large, well-to-do organizations. I'm not going to take names here, who have told me where the workforce has been told that, look, we are starting this remote workforce structure, which they started at the time of COVID, and they have continued. But when some of the workforce has tried to address the issue of electricity bills, internet bills, and all of that, the response given is, we pay you enough, so you can account for it. But the point is that, practically speaking, they're working out of their home. So you are saving on infrastructure cost. So if you are saving on infrastructure cost, why is that benefit not being extended to the workforce? Is a question that comes up very often. The number of work from home policies that I have reviewed, and when we have sought feedback from the workforce, that is what they have said. So if we are talking purely from a financial perspective, I think it is very important where the government will have to recognize that with the new forms and work structures, and I would say workforce structures that are coming in, really how to financially incentivize them. And this will have to be done hand in hand with the organizations who are hiring and creating such workforce structures, as to incentivize them to work so that the economy can benefit from it, whereas the government can also get returns from it. It's not a private a benefit only. It is a national benefit. It is a government benefit, because if we benefit and the government benefits, it results in the overall benefit of the country. So from a pure financial perspective, we will have to look at what of these aspects can be understood from a financial perspective in this thing. Of course, if you talk to me about overhaul of the labor laws, see, a step in that direction has already been taken. Anshul has spoken about it in a lot of detail. Dr. Swati has talked about it in a lot of detail. There are the codes. It's a question of, they have been pending for a while. There have been multiple reasons why their coming into force has been delayed. And let's hope that this consolidation, because we have only been reading about it till now, when they go into practice, how much changes. But I will just like to tell the audience that anytime that there is anything new, you will take time to adjust it. So stop thinking of it like a demon. It's the fear of the unknown. One always acclimatizes and adjusts into anything new. And I'm sure there will be a runway period for everyone to understand and enforce what needs to be enforced here. And getting nervous about the fact that there is a new law coming will not help. It's like when you go from standard 8 to standard 9, you can be nervous about it, but ultimately you settle in. You move from an old house to a new house, from an old job to a new job, from an old position to a new position. There is always that time that is required for acclimatization. So since we have an audience, I would say the labor codes are, hopefully, we should see them coming into force. And when they do, you have people who can explain, and there will be a gestation period, which I'm sure we will all be allowed to digest and to understand, and then for the law to be enforced. Nobody's going to be running with a handcuff in their hand. The government will not come running with a handcuff in their hand to handcuff people, because everyone needs to understand the law. But revisions, I think they're already taking place. Change, slow and steady, is coming about. One needs to be patient. There are points of frustration everywhere, but we also have to look at the positive side of things and see and have a more solution-based approach as opposed to only ranting about the problems.
Right. As you rightly mentioned, there is going to be a transition phase from old to new, but that can be easily managed. That's what we need to understand. Thank you so much, Apeksha. Now I would like to ask Dr. Swati, what challenges do multi-state establishments with varying state labor laws face? Coming back to the state laws.
We've already talked about the kind of partnership that is actually required between the center and the state and how everything needs to be taken hand in glove. As far as the establishments that are there in different states, I already said that, well, don't let us make the compliances so difficult and so varied that they would rather not comply and pay a penalty than to go into the hassle of compliance. Now, the biggest problems that, the establishments that are omnipresent, so to say, throughout the country is the compliance burden. Like I said, the minimum wages differ, the procedures differ, the authorities differ. So for them, navigating different labor laws, different regulations in each state, it is not only time consuming, sometimes it also becomes an impossibility. Now, even the law does not say, that do the impossible. Let us not. Now, something that is so totally difficult that it becomes financially non-viable, I would say it is an impossibility. So our job as, a person who's commenting on the laws, and then the job of the legislature who's actually formulating these laws is to make them easy to comply with. Easy does not necessarily mean, bad. Easy means something that can be understood and taken up by every person to whom that particular law would impact upon them. As far as the different states are concerned, we also have inconsistent policies. Now, there are variation in labor policies, and that is how inconsistencies amongst the HR of that establishment and the employees, the kind of benefits that they are getting across states. Now, see, this establishment is there in different states, so they cannot have a sort of a no exchange policy between the employees of different states. Now, when one employee feels that the other one is getting more benefits, it will not bode well for the establishment as a whole. Now, that is unavoidable in the wake of the fact that the policies differ between the states, and if you're complying on the policies, you're somehow penalizing certain employees who are belonging to certain states that are not as strong on the employee benefits as the other ones. Then we have the legal uncertainty that crops up every time there is a conflicting interpretation and enforcement of law. So this creates a lot of legal uncertainties. You go to one legal practitioner, he would say something. You go to the other one, he says something else. Now, both are correct. But sometimes both are saying something that is completely diametrically opposite to the other one. So where do we go? What do we do? That is, creating a fix for the establishment. Then resource allocation now. In order to ensure compliance, you need to allocate the resources in such a way that, the diverse state laws would be complied with. And this would divert your attention from the core business activity. Like I said, the main job of an entrepreneur is to generate profits, generate work. Don't we want that work to be generated within India? Don't we want that GDP to rise? But how will it rise if our core attention is set on compliance issues, and that too multi-compliance issues, because all the states are asked together. One is saying you concentrate on this, the other one is saying something diametrically opposite. So in order to ensure that, these things are taken care of, we really need the center and the state to work together. This thing needs to be adapted well in order for the labor to get the benefit of it.
Thank you so much for sharing your views. Thank you to all the eminent speakers we have in our session today. Thank you so much for sharing your expectations and your viewpoints on the Union Budget 2024 for the HR sector. Let's really hope that the points which we have discussed really come into the benefit for the HR sector. Thank you so much, and thanks to all the participants who are with us till the end. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
all.
you for the invite.
मतलब इसको स्टार्ट होते ही ये तो भैया बहुत मुश्किल है।
चलिए, डॉक्टर